I'm going to start the countdown, and then you can go ahead and try streaming. Okay. Did you have luck
Nicole,
with your
I'm not
streaming,
having.
Ken?
No, I did not. They wanted me to join something. But you know what? We'll repost it afterwards and my audience can watch it then. Because I've been
Absolutely.
promoting
And
your
so,
audience to be on yours as well.
yeah, so hopefully some of your supporters will join on my page. It is a public page. And then we can share it. You can share it on your page and your campaign page as well. So hi, everyone, anyone who is joining us. My name is Nicole Beverly. For those of you who don't know me, and I am a licensed clinical social worker and a survivor of domestic violence, stalking, and multiple attempts by my ex-husband to hire individuals to kill me from prison. And tonight, I have a guest with me, Ken Magee, who is running for Washtenaw County Sheriff in 2024. So thank you so much for joining me this evening, Ken. I know you have a very busy schedule.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So I want to start out because I have a tendency to assume that people know my story and know why I'm so passionate about domestic violence. So I want to take a few minutes just to give a little bit about background about myself, Ken, and then we'll jump into interviewing you and sharing why you think you are the right person for this job. So for anyone who doesn't know my story, I met my abuser, who became my husband, now my ex-husband, back in college. So right at the age when most individuals get in their first abusive relationship, right in that 16 to 24-year-old age range. And I didn't know better. I didn't know the red flags. I got sucked in, and before you know it, I was in an abusive relationship. It took me a very long time to recognize I was in an abusive relationship and to get the courage to leave. And when I did leave, my ex-husband did stalk me for the better part of 2.5 years. I had a lot of disappointments with law enforcement, with the way law enforcement responded when I called 911. Things that I was told that there wasn't anything that they could do, that it was my word against his word. I didn't feel many of the times when I called for help that I was taken seriously, unfortunately. And then even once, we had multiple arrests for stalking, aggravated stalking, witness intimidation, extortion, and the attempts to hire started happening, I had even more letdowns by law enforcement when they were investigating my cases. Ken, you read my book, Finding Nicole, so you had an opportunity to really see how many times I was let down by law enforcement. Like every time I had a little bit of hope, something would happen, that there were mistakes made or someone maybe didn't believe me. And had law enforcement handled things maybe differently, my story may have ended up a lot different, and I may not have had to have gone through as much of the things that myself and my two boys had gone through. I'm really bad at plugging myself, so I'm going to plug myself right now too. My book is called Finding Nicole, and I know, Ken, you mentioned in your post, I didn't even know Ann Arbor Public Library has it, so that's wonderful to know. It's also available at Amazon, BookBaby, and other major retailers and libraries. So it's not just my story, but it's also a guidebook. The entire back section is a guidebook for anyone who is finding themselves in an abusive relationship, anyone who's recently left an abusive relationship or is trying to still heal from an abusive relationship. And there are tips in there for everything from how to talk to the police, how to document for law enforcement, for the judicial system when you're going before judges, to, when I left, I had no money. So how to secure your house with very little income. So there's a little bit of everything in the guidebook section. Tried to make it as diverse and helpful as possible. So that's my background. I also do have a nonprofit organization called the Enough Initiative. And I always say, because we're talking about a campaign and a political issue, that anything we talk about today is Nicole Beverly, not the Enough Initiative, because we have a 501c3 and we don't talk politics about it, but it's just part of who I am and the work that I do for domestic violence prevention. So that's a little background on me. Ken, if you would mind
tell us about the
sharing.
movie. Tell us about the movie.
Oh, yeah. So yes, my story has been turned into a movie, and Harley Wallen and Katie Wallen are the producers of the movie Finding Nicole. It's titled the same as the book, and we are in final contract negotiations. So we should have some news soon. I know people are getting tired of me saying we're going to have news soon, but we will have news soon about the movie and when it's coming out. So yes, thank you for asking about that. Hopefully it'll be in theaters as well as then streamed, so we can reach as many people as possible.
Sounds good.
So yeah, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your background in law enforcement and any other experience with domestic violence, that would be amazing.
Sure. I will start from being born in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Washtenaw County is my home. I'm a product of the Ann Arbor public school system, Angel, Tappan, and Huron High School. I went off to college and got my bachelor's and master's degree up at Michigan State in police administration, and with a concentration in police administration as well as juvenile delinquency. I started my first career in law enforcement position as a patrol officer in Jackson, Michigan, where I worked almost 4 years. Well, I was laid off due to budget cuts for 1 year, and they placed us on the fire department. So I learned all about being a firefighter during that first 4 years of being a police officer as well. But it was a dynamic time in Jackson. I learned a lot. I learned an awful lot. I saw a lot. I had a police officer shot and killed, and I was with him when he died. And I saw my fair share of domestic violence victims and some horrific stories that I don't know would trigger individuals watching this video or not, but there are certain stories that I will never forget. And from that point, besides seeing the violence and destruction that domestic violence can cause and other things that are out there in the community, I then applied to be a federal agent. And I became a federal agent for almost a quarter of a century. I worked all around the world, to include Europe. I had an assignment there briefly. I also worked in South America for 7 years. I worked on the West Coast of the United States, the East Coast of the United States, undercover in Detroit. I've done a lot of things in that career path. And being a federal agent, rising through the ranks, I, as an executive running a 3-state region, and as well as just a brand new agent putting together a plan, an operational plan for whether it be an undercover operation or something strategic to attack a problem, I learned a variety of skill sets as a federal agent: how to attack a problem, how to attack crime, how to attack problems that are associated with crimes in the community. And it's not just attacking crimes where we look at a county. Sometimes it's a neighborhood. Even as federal agents, we would combat a specific problem in a specific neighborhood, and then into a county, and then into a region. And we've also created, and I've been involved in implementing, creating the strategy, implementing, reviewing, and then assessing strategies that deal with programs that cover multi-states. Take it one step further, internationally, globally. And I've created a lot of programs that work that way, because fighting crime, fighting the domestic violence situations, and some of the other things we'll talk about today all have the same basic foundation on how you attack it. It's just how creative can you be? What can you learn? So I did that for almost a quarter century. Some of my successes: I captured an FBI top 10 fugitive. I was next to the bomb in Atlanta when it blew up at the 1996 Olympics. I worked on the little girl that we saved. We couldn't save her mother. She was gone. I was on a team in Bogota as the assistant to the supervisor for the Pablo Escobar investigation, the world's most notorious drug lord, and was a key participant in that investigation, part of a small elite team. I'm very proud of those accomplishments, and including another situation where 2 federal agents were kidnapped and they were taken into the jungles and they were shot. And I worked 7 years to create a strategy and a plan to apprehend the individual that was responsible for that heinous act of kidnapping and trying to murder 2 federal agents. By the grace of God, they both survived. So we take all of those experiences. I have been in the bush. I have been in the courtroom. I have been in the executive chambers. I have testified in front of various committees at all levels of government. It's created a great foundation for me, and experience matters in a position like the sheriff. You have to have the experience to be able to handle all the things that are going to be thrown at you each and every single day. And following my time as a federal agent, I was a chief of police at the University of Michigan. I was very proud of my work there. I created a special initiative there attacking the problem of sexual assault to young ladies on campus. For the majority, it was young ladies. We do have obviously members of the LGBTQ community and others that are sadly victims and hopefully survivors of sexual assault. But I created a special program there. It was called the Chief's 10-Point Promise. And because I was assessing the problem and saying what needs to be done here so people will come forward. And basically it was empowering the victim, empowering the survivors to make decisions. And for example, this is the brochure I created. It's called A Promise to You, a message from the University of Michigan Police, and a 10-point promise that I had in there. And I held myself accountable to making sure that this was done. And my final note in the letter is, we are your police department. We're here to help you. It's just not our duty. It's our promise. And when a law enforcement executive and leader makes a promise, like I made to those 2 federal agents that were kidnapped and shot, saying, I will find the guy that did this to you. Even though it took 7 years, I found him. And when a law enforcement officer makes a promise as an executive, he better follow through with that promise. And how do you hold that promise intact? You're accountable. You hold yourself accountable. You're transparent, but you're present. And that's what leadership has to be. And we're going to talk about that more when I talk with you about some of the solutions. I retired from law enforcement for a while, but kept my fingers and my hands into the pot. I was constantly studying. I was constantly going to seminars. I'm also on a specialized team that exists right now out of Washington, D.C. that works with specific crimes against children. And I also am a consultant, and I've consulted to various communities on problems such as the opioid epidemic and other matters. And spent a lot of time, my time too, helping in nonprofit organizations. I've helped with cancer research, elderly, teen suicide. I've done a lot of things. So I'm pleased to be here, and I thank you for letting me spend a few minutes talking about my background. And let's get to business on what the epidemic is and what the problem here is in Washtenaw County.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to mention, if anyone who's watching has direct questions for Ken or I, you can type them in the comments. We can see them and we can try to address any questions or comments that you have as we're having this discussion. And I know, hi T, I know that some people who are watching are going to be survivors who have had personal experiences themselves. And I want them to feel comfortable asking questions about how situations could be handled, would be handled while we're having this discussion, or maybe even if you want to share in the comments some experiences you've had with police response to domestic violence calls, it could be helpful to the conversation that we're having. So just want to make sure people know they can comment during this live. We'll try to address questions that and comments that come up as they do. And I'm reminding my intern may be joining us too, Izzy, in the comment section with some questions. She's my intern for the Enough Initiative, but she's an amazing young lady, and she's in school. And so as we know, everyone's busy, and we appreciate anyone joining us tonight because we know everyone has busy lives, but this is a really important topic. And while we're saying this election is in 2024, we know that it will be here before we know it. Time is flying, and we want to get as much information from the different candidates because this is a very important position in our county. And so I take it very seriously, especially with the work that I do to make sure people have education and information from each of the candidates about how they intend to battle this epidemic. And we do know it's an epidemic that's not going away. The numbers are not decreasing. The homicides related to domestic violence are increasing. Children being impacted every single year, 15.5 million nationally, makes them 90% more likely to grow up to be victims or perpetrators of abuse. You know, we're battling an epidemic, and Ken, you and I talked briefly before, you know, we set up this interview that with most epidemics, people come at it, you know, hard with prevention, and we're not seeing that from a federal or state level or county level at this point in time. So I would like to, you know, ask you at this point, just some of your ideas. Should you be elected as sheriff of Washtenaw County? What ideas, what things would you bring with you to help combat this epidemic?
Sure. Well, the very first thing I would come with is leadership, experience, and I would come at it from the approach that I'm not going to push it down the road. I'm not kicking the can down the road. I'm not assigning it to somebody else. I feel 100% that our sheriff should be 100% accountable for his actions, 100% transparent. Those are two parts of my platform as well. And I also feel that if you're going to attack a problem, you need to be there. You need to be the person in the meetings and not delegate it somewhere else. When it comes to emergencies, this is not like we're sponsoring a kids' drug prevention art cartoon contest where maybe you might have a sergeant and a small panel of people review it. This is not it. This is one of the three major problems that we have in Washtenaw County. We can combine all the problems together in three areas. Violence. And how do we look at violence? We're looking at domestic violence and street violence. Two separate types of violence, but violence. The other is suicide, and the other is drugs and the opioid epidemic that we face. All of them are costing lives. So, as I indicated earlier, what do I do as a leader? I study the problem. But more importantly, in a leadership position, in my opinion, is that you need to have the ability, and this is part of what becoming a federal agent did for me. Our agency would have a program called Trends in Trafficking and Crime, where you are constantly being inundated with statistics and data. And good leaders foresee the problem before it becomes an epidemic. And that is what hasn't happened here. And that didn't happen with the opioid epidemic, and that didn't happen with, for example, COVID, right? Good leaders should have foreseen and prepared to have all the resources together for suicide, increased opioid dependency and drug addictions and alcoholism, and domestic violence. I don't think it was seen. Using some common sense when you start to think about isolation and what's going to transpire there. Good leaders will say, how will this impact us? We have other leaders in public health talking to us about wearing masks and vaccinations and social distancing and all that on ways to prevent spreading the problem. And then we have other public health officials saying, once the disease spreads, how are we going to treat it in the hospitals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what we failed to do was take a look at how it would impact so many other areas of life. As a federal agent, so a lot of things I learned was predicting trends and looking at the future. So that's one of the things I would do as well. Say, where are we at? Where are the stats? Every week, you want to review them. So that's number one. Number two, as I've talked about also in number one, is you have to be there. The leader has to be there. You can't push something like this, an epidemic, down the road. You have to be the person in charge, and you have to hold yourself accountable. You have to admit when you're wrong, and you have to give others the credit when you're right. And why? Because it is a team effort, and it really takes a team. So I've looked at, since I met you the very first time, as I indicated to you on the phone, I've seen domestic violence. I've had family members that have been victims of domestic violence. I've learned and studied domestic violence from a perspective of a patrol officer, and also going to various seminars on crime prevention. But you enlightened me. I'll be very honest with you. You enlighten me. And I also say good leaders need to listen and surround themselves with experts and know they don't always have all the answers. But I have had a phrase my entire career, once I became an executive. In order to be a successful leader in today's day and age, you have to have the ability in law enforcement to think outside the badge, think differently. Maintain your traditional police values, your traditional planning, but seek out assistance in other arenas, whether it be through the arena of social work or through the fiduciary responsibilities on things. You have to think differently. You have to understand that the younger generation today is not the younger generation that when you were younger, whether it be social media or whatever the case may be. Think outside the badge. Still, you're the police chief or you're the sheriff, you're still in charge, and you have to maintain your traditional values, but you have to be creative in thinking of things differently. So thinking outside the badge. And I think you, Nicole, in reading your book and understanding that this is an epidemic and you lived it, as you saw in my post once, I said, not only are you a victim, you're a survivor, you're a student, and you're an educator of all of this. And to listen to people like you is what law enforcement leaders should do. And your book was enlightening as well in regards to, I think, in a certain way, as I say, thinking outside the badge, you thought outside the abuse, outside the chambers of abuse. And the example I was giving to my wife was when I had your book, after I finished it, I looked at my wife and I told her, this is very creative. She sought the advice of her son on how to design the cover of the book, because her son said, if an abuser walks in and sees this book saying 10 steps to prevent domestic violence in your household, chances are it's going to become a volatile situation. So that was just, I noticed that. It was the idea of thinking outside the arena of abuse and being creative, just like law enforcement leaders in today's day and age are doing. So I learned a lot from your book. I learned some of your thoughts, and some of them I agree with. Most of them I agree with. But I also looked at it and thinking, what else can we do? And that's where I feel that I have the ability to lead a law enforcement agency, not just lead them, but move them in a direction as to what we're going to do and how we're going to do things differently. You've expressed your discontent with various police agencies. For example, in your book, you talk about having to pay $300 to the Michigan State Police and $398 to the Department of Corrections to get reports that you needed for your safety. That's ridiculous, and that's obscene, and that shouldn't happen. Part of my campaign platform is accountability and transparency, where I want the public to not have to worry about paying exorbitant amounts of money to get police reports. It shouldn't be that way. So when we take a look at something as simple as that, having the record systems more open, that's one of the things I'm going to do. Make it accountable, make the agency accountable, all transparent, and not carry on and pass on these exorbitant costs to somebody that might be having problems putting food on the table that night, let alone dropping $780, $680 for fees. And I'm sure there were a lot more from other agencies that you went through, but so that's one of my ideas in regards to transparency and accountability. But then I look at
Quite frankly,
solutions.
I was gonna say,
Go ahead.
just to interrupt really quick, I was like, quite
Sure.
frankly, like I 100% recognize and acknowledge that I am one of the lucky ones, because I had enough income. I had a job that allowed me, even though it sucked and it was hard, to come up with that money for something as simple as a police report. But there are so many victims who don't even have 10 extra dollars, let alone 300 extra police reports, an additional $380 or $90, whatever it was for corrections record, prison records. So I 100% agree. It's unacceptable, because then if you don't have those records and you're trying to prove things to people who don't believe you, that's yet another obstacle to overcome for a victim.
Well, and I totally agree with you. I think we already pay enough taxes to be able to have services for people. We don't charge people to have a police officer respond to their house in the middle of a call, and we shouldn't charge them to get the reports on something that you initiated. And those are things that I'm going to eliminate. I am going to eliminate those as the sheriff. And when you talk about the individuals that are financially struggling, when you look at 50% of the homeless women are victims of domestic violence. They're financially struggling. When you look at some of the things you talk about in your book as well, many of those things I think are geared to people who are financially struggling, such as homes on a budget. Some of the things you talked about there. So once I read your book and I started thinking about things, and I think about things a lot when I'm thinking about taking an office such as the office of the sheriff. What will I do better? How will I save lives? I've already attacked the drugs and the opioid situation. I've looked at gun violence. Specifically, for example, we've had almost 16 murders in this county in the last 6 months. I've looked at some of those solutions as well. And this is not the time for that, because we're here to talk about domestic violence. But there are so many
of those murders were domestic violence related.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. No question about it. No question about it. So let's talk about, and some of them were gang related and some of them were retaliation, a little bit of everything, sadly, and some were drug deals, and it's, the whole thing is tragic. Like I said, there's 3 areas. There's drug, suicide, and violence in our community, which is killing people. And when it comes to violence, there's the 2 categories, and we're here speaking about one, which is extremely important. I think, whether it be the murders in Saline with the domestic violence situation, it's here and it's alive, and it's in Washtenaw County that so many people promote as being wonderful and beautiful, which it is. But guess what, folks? We're susceptible to a lot of the problems that every other community has throughout the United States. And it's people like me that recognize that and want to make change. And that's why I'm running for sheriff. And it's like people like you that recognize it and start nonprofit initiatives to go out and educate individuals. So I think a lot about these things. And I said, what would I do for solutions? What could I do? What could I do differently? How could I think outside the badge? What is traditional law enforcement not doing today that they could be doing? And I also combined that with, if you recall, I asked you at the end of our conversation, if you had your way, Nicole, the top 5 things you would do immediately, if you could wave a magic wand and end this. Your responses dealt with, number 1 is funding, helping schools educate high schoolers and middle schoolers in regards to finding out the red flags, what they all mean, educating young girls about the red flags and the dangers, and educating the young men as to how to deal with their frustrations, how to handle relationships as they reach those ages and they reach puberty and they don't have social skill sets that they might not have learned at home, or they are a victim of themselves of domestic or child abuse. So those type of things, that was number 1. Number 2, you talked about resources for victims. And these resources for victims ranged from housing to assistance with the PPOs, to enhanced legal services, to a handful of other things. You nailed it. It was assistance. And then you talked about changing sentencing guidelines, which is something the sheriff doesn't do. But one of the important things about the sheriff is that the sheriff has the keys to the kingdom when it comes to the information and the data to pass on to congressmen, legislators, and individuals such as that. So, and then the next thing you talked about was overhauling the PPO process. And because it's extremely difficult, sometimes it doesn't transfer, sometimes it expires and survivors aren't aware of it. And those are important things for survivors to know about it. So I took all of these things that you talked about, and some of these things are in your book, and I started to say, what's different? What could be done differently now? For example, once again, the keys to the kingdom of information are right there at the fingertips of the police officers at all times. Number one, I would advocate legislation for a domestic violence registry. We have them for sexual predators. We have no-fly lists for people to get on airplanes. Why don't we have that? Now, I understand that any list that the government creates can be abused. There should be a system in place that if you're on the list, a system to appeal. There should be a educational process as to once you get on that list, if you're a domestic violence abuser, whether you've been convicted of 1 misdemeanor or 2 misdemeanor or 3 misdemeanors or a felony. And then not only having you on that list, but also having a educational process that you can go through, such as psychological treatment. One of the things I learned in your book, which was extremely fascinating, one of the main problems that I think you face in this whole domestic violence world is the component of the neurochemistry. And you spoke about that. The abuser sticks into the relationship quite frequently because of the neurochemistry. I'm sorry, the survivor.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
abuser can't release from the relationship and go and leave and conceptually understand that it's over because of the neurochemistry. And so, once again, we create a domestic violence registry, which allows people, just like they look up sexual violence or child predators, things of that nature. And that's one of my ideas. And if I have the data to be able to do that, to show it to legislators, I think that's a viable option to help people prevent themselves from getting it. If they start to see the red flags in a relationship, they look and say, whoa. So that's number one. Number two, I believe that we create special narcotics task forces and we create SWAT teams, we create internet investigation units, we create all sorts of financial crimes units. We do that. Why can't we create a special unit that handles domestic violence cases? Seeing how 40% of all calls to 911 are related to domestic violence, give or take a few percentage points wherever you go in the United States. But 40% of the interaction that you're going to have with individuals deals with domestic violence. Why don't we create these special units within the police department that understands the nuances that it's a different type of assault. It's not like a barroom brawl where 2 guys knocked each other's teeth out and you've got to piece together how the crime occurred. But they can study things such as the manipulation of the speech, the psychology of manipulation, the actual wounds impacted onto a victim or a survivor, such as the method of strangulation that is quite often used. And I feel that if you create a special unit that is basically a hybrid or subcomponent of a sexual assault unit, I think you could make great strides in regards to preventing domestic violence, especially reoccurring domestic violence. So that's another idea I have. Then I have something that I think is very creative as well, and that is this. Police officers go to calls every single day dealing with domestic violence. Some handle them very well, some don't. You know, there's a thing in your book where you talk about when your former spouse hired somebody to contract to murder you. And on April 19th, you got a call from a detective telling you that there was a murder plot being generated by your former husband. From a perspective of a law enforcement leader and a perspective of a guy that cares about people, no matter who they are, I'm kind of appalled that you got a phone call for that, as opposed to a knock on the door, we need to see you immediately. And that's just a wrong way to handle situations. Definitely the wrong way. And I'm not sure how you felt that day, but I can tell you this, if for some reason it was my daughter that got that call, and now you're sitting there in your home in a frightful fear of like not even afraid to open the door or look outside, meaning are they coming for me right now? Just a horrifying situation. Those type of situations shouldn't occur. And you spoke in your book about having relationships with Ariana Slay, and she was partially your angel prosecutor that helped you tremendously. And that's outstanding. We need more of those folks. And now she's in the judicial ranks and doing a good job there. But a lot of people could have learned from her as well. And I understand she does seminars and things of that nature as well. And that's a good thing. But the idea of what I came up with as well is, remember I said we have all the tools, we have all the data, we have all the information. So creating a panel of folks, this is not a task force, but a panel of folks that deal with social workers, domestic violence survivors, could be combined, psychiatrists, and the health industry, as well as law enforcement. And once a month, these would be people that would come and they would meet. And every month they would meet and they would review body camera footage of patrol officers or deputies on the street and how they reacted to a scene of domestic violence. And granted, it could be graphic, it could be ugly. But what if, for example, they analyze these things as experts and are able to pass the information on immediately to the department? Say, this is not a punishment, this is not a penalty, but we've reviewed these videos and this officer needs to learn that you can't use the word so-and-so in a dialogue with a survivor, or you don't want to use another word with an abuser, or your body posture, your hands like this, going like this, meaning, okay, you've had enough, whatever. And with a group of experts analyzing the actual recordings on what's on the street, I think we could make great strides in regards to learning more on how to educate our officers. Every department has in-service training. I will say that. And the idea that I strive for as a leader is to think outside the badge and how can we enhance our training? And there's nothing that is one step away from being in a real life situation, allowing these, for lack of a better term, ghost viewers reviewing the videos shortly thereafter or once a month or however we approach. But that's one of my ideas, creating a special team. For example, I talk about words. Hostage negotiators go through extensive training on how to speak to a suspect holding a hostage. For example, if the hostage says something like, I want $1 million and I want an armored truck, and the hostage negotiator says, look, Jim, shoot, I can't get that in 1 hour for you. He used the word shoot in the dialogue. In that dialogue that I just said, the hostage negotiator says, shoot, I can't. You say the word shoot when you're a hostage negotiator. Those are the kind of things that hostage negotiators are trained not to say. So we turn around and we teach the officers, you could have been triggering somebody in this, both sides, either the abuser or the victim, how to de-escalate the situation appropriately. Additionally, when people think, well, all we're doing is pointing out fault, I think there's a lot of great police officers out there that use techniques that they have incorporated into their day-to-day interaction with people that the staff that I create, the team that I create, could learn. They might say, wow, I never thought of that. That's outstanding police work. And that's great. And look how he de-escalated this. And it might be something that, let's give a lot of credit to some of these cops that have been on the road for 10 and 20 years. They can always learn, but they always, almost all of them have certain techniques that they've used that have been conducive towards conflict resolution. So another idea that I had was when I was a patrol officer, I remember we had a series of homes that were emergency shelters. I've read all the paperwork about Safe House. I know you were engaged in the Safe House situation. It was a horrific scene and one that leadership was not on point, one that leadership failed, one that leadership overseeing leadership failed, and it was horrible. So do we have enough beds? Do we have enough rooms? Do we have enough rooms for women with 3 kids, 4 kids, et cetera, et cetera? Do we have enough rooms for the individual that's from the LGBTQ community that's trying to escape the individual that's involved with the intimate partner violence? Do we have enough of those? And when I was a young patrolman, I remember there was a series of homes that were very similar to the foster home type of thing, where if there wasn't enough room here, we had emergency shelters, homes, and create a system where it's almost like bordering system where people can go, but they're clandestine and they're private, and there's rules when you get into them. So, for example, you get in there, the spouse, the survivor might have her phone taken away to say, we can't take any chance of your abuser knowing where we're at right now, where this location is. And then if she wants to reach out and touch base with family members, they work that out. But my point is this: creating some sort of foster home model to find adequate housing that's normally in a temporary basis, whether it be a day, a week, or a month, and find individuals that in the community that want to participate in that. And I'm sure there are plenty. Your book talks a little bit about CPLs. Am I a firm advocate of CPLs? I am a firm advocate for responsible gun ownership. And there's only one reason to have a CPL, only one, and that is to maintain your safety and your loved one's safety in the event of a threat. That's the only reason people get a CPL. You know, you don't need a CPL to do target practice. You don't need a CPL to do hunting or whatever. So I'm a firm advocate in regards to working with that specialized unit that I had described to you earlier, not the group of interdisciplinary modalities crossing the spectrum, but I'm a firm believer in utilizing the special unit to also be able to push people in the right direction about CPL training, even provide it. I have no problems with that. I have no problems with grants, trying to find people, violence survivors, apply for grants, a class. I don't have a problem with that. And I'm a firm believer. One of the things I didn't mention in my introduction, that I'm a 4th degree black belt in the martial arts of Taekwondo, been involved with it. One of my mentors in Ann Arbor got me on the right track. I was kind of a wild kid, and through that I learned martial arts for years and years and years. And I gave numerous self-defense seminars to women. I was a coach of a children's team as well, coaching children, traveling all throughout the United States in Taekwondo. There's a sport of Taekwondo, and then there's the art of Taekwondo, and then there's the self-defense aspect of Taekwondo. And I would specialize in that. So when it comes to CPL training, self-defense training, firm advocate, we could use more in the community. And that's what I believe. I believe that there are probably also people out there that are not enthusiasts of weapons, but those aren't the ones that are endangered. Let those people who are endangered decide if they should have a weapon in their household. One of the things,
And ironically, just since you brought it up, I'm going to put this out there. If I am having a retreat November 18th and 19th for victims and survivors. That is actually a combination of self-defense and CPL. One full day
well,
is going
there
to
you
be
have it.
dedicated to self-defense. The second day is going to be CPL training, and the link should be posted tomorrow. We've just been narrowing down a few of the final details, but it's going to be held at Lincoln High School, self-defense training right here in Ypsilanti, and then we'll be at Ann Arbor Arms in Ann Arbor for the CPL portion of the class. So just want to throw that out there. If anyone is interested, since this topic did just come up, and Ken, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I always am prepared for pushback from people who don't want to own guns and have feelings about it. And I definitely feel there are certain people who should not have guns. And I see Izzy I will get to your question, and Satitra in just a second. I see your questions, but for someone like myself who could not rely on law enforcement to respond quickly enough when my ex-husband was stalking me and or had people that he was hiring to kill me. That was the only way I could protect myself and my family, was by getting a CPL. But it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as just getting your CPL. You have to be trained well so that that gun is not taken away from you. And I'm a firm believer in that. And that's something that we're going to really focus on at our retreat. And you have to be prepared to pull the trigger if you need to pull the trigger.
And that's all part of the training.
Exactly. And that's all part of the training. So I just, I know, and I'm always prepared for pushback with it, but having lived through it and having worked with so many victims who are literally living their lives in fear, looking over their shoulders constantly, not sleeping at night, going through self-defense training and having a CPL can at least give them some sense of control back over their lives. So anyone who is a victim or survivor interested in that training we have coming up, I promise it'll be up within the next 2 days, the registration link. So I didn't want to cut you off too much, Ken,
No, I didn't know that, but that's awesome too. You're one step ahead of me then. So we'll once I get elected next year, we'll incorporate some of these other programs and get the ball running that way as well. So along the lines of firearms, I also am a firm believer in. I didn't create this program, obviously, but recently some of the red flag laws were implemented, and I've testified in regards to. In front of some of our state reps in the Capitol when I was chief of police about the dangers of weapons on campus. And imagine weapons on campus when we have some of the things that already are occurring on campus. So in regards to that, where I was a strong advocate that weapons should not be on campus. But along those lines, when we speak about weapons, I also gave advice several months ago to a group of political think tanks, so to speak, about the concerns that police officers have in regards to responding to a scene. And they listened to me, and they are closing some of the, let's say, loopholes or laws or enforcing, or they're making laws. In essence, what it is this. As a police officer for decades, a police officer could come to your house. You say, he's really mean to me, I'm scared of him. And he says, no, she's delusional, whatever the case may be. Or he's been drinking and you haven't been, whatever. Ma'am, are there guns in the house? Yes, there are. There's 3 weapons. He's got 2 shotguns and a handgun. Okay, where are they? Where are they? And the guy says, I don't have to tell you, and I'm not going to. Police couldn't do anything. Was there any crime committed yet? Not that they could assess, otherwise he'd be hauled off already, or she, or whatever. Was there any crime committed yet? No. But there are guns in the house, and the police officers leave that house thinking this sinking feeling in their stomach. There's nothing I can do. Now, granted, through training and things like that, we're able to try and convince the person it's in his best interest, et cetera, et cetera. There are those things, those verbal cues that we all learn. But at the end of the day, there are people that just say, get the hell out of here. I don't want to talk to you. Get out of my house. She hasn't been hurt. I haven't been hurt. We don't want to talk to you. And she's sitting in the corner like nothing she can do. And you talk about that, why they stay, whether it be love, fear, shame, finances, lack of esteem, neurochemistry, who knows? But it's a problem for the police, and the police can save more lives having that tool. And I'm happy to say that I think my ideas were listened to. So, and then the final thing, and we'll get to the questions, and that is, I have heard quite frequently one of the problems with the PPO process and some of the other things and holding people accountable, locking people up, et cetera, is a slow process of paperwork. I think as a police official, law enforcement leader, you should put a thorough deadline on getting your paperwork done, ready, submitted, and given to the prosecutor. And sergeants are held accountable, lieutenants and captains and commanders, as well as the guy up top or the gal up top, whoever it is. You need to hold your people accountable to make sure that that paperwork is processed. How do you do that? Through leadership, through direction, through creating policy, and creating culture, saying this is one of our priorities. and we need to take care of it. Why? Because those 40% calls to 911 constantly are coming in, and there's repeat offenders, there's repeat recidivism, you name it. And that's one of the ideas. But the judicial system can't always make their decisions without having the adequate paperwork or whatever. So we have to create a culture within a law enforcement agency to say, this is one of our number one priorities. So I've touched base on several things I've been thinking about. Each one of them, I could go deep into depth. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of thinking, a lot of brainstorming, and I do a lot of question asking, and love Q&As and love the interaction with individuals to learn more. So I hope I've touched base on some of the things that I would definitely implement, and I'd like to open it up to questions or anything else you'd like to talk about, Nicole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, one of the questions that comes to my mind, we talked about the fact of when a crime hasn't been proven to be committed, and officers are on scene and they know there are guns there, it's one thing. But in our state currently, even if has been an arrest, even if there is an active PPO, there's nothing in place where police go into a home and remove guns. We don't have a law like that in our state yet. My understanding is that cities can implement that on their own to make that happen. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And I know it can put police officers in more danger when they're going in to remove firearms, when there's no domestic violence. However, we also know that when a victim leaves, they're most at risk for being murdered. And if their abuser has a firearm on them, we know there's a PPO in place. We know there's a history of abuse. Getting that weapon away from that abuser is critical. Just what are your thoughts when it's reached that level of removal of firearms?
You're talking about extreme risk laws. And that is what I was talking about when I referred to speaking to state reps about the concerns of police officers not being able to take weapons when they feel that there's a threat. And there's ways to go about getting weapons. It's called search warrants. Well, there's several ways to do it. Number one is given permission. Here's my weapon. You turn them over, relinquishing custody of the weapon. Number two is search warrants. But a lot of times you don't have time for search warrants. I'm a strong advocate for red flag laws, and I'm a strong advocate. And many people who are involved in the gun cultures don't like my thoughts on this, but I believe police officers should be able to take weapons at scenes that are considered extremely volatile and risky without a warrant. But I think there should be a due process part of it that immediately within 24 hours, the officer has to explain to a judicial panel, to a judge, whomever the case may be, why they seize that weapon. And the judge or the judicial panel make the decision whether that weapon should be returned or not. But what you did there was you de-escalated the situation that night. And that just doesn't protect the prospective victim or the reoccurring victim, the reoccurring survivor. That also protects the individual, because police officer, the individual that owns the weapons, the individual that may be the abuser, it protects them. And what do I mean by that? They don't commit suicide. They don't pull a weapon on a police officer and get killed. And it also protects the community at large, because random firefights occur and people get hurt. So I'm a strong advocate of it. And if asked as a law enforcement professional, would I testify on the Hill, in the Capitol, to a local government? Absolutely, I would, 100%. It's one of my key tenets in regards to stopping domestic violence, and that is getting guns out of the household when an abusive situation is occurring. Now it may sound like a conflicting argument about having a CPL with the victim, but I'm going to go down that road right now, because I think the person that says, well, it's a convicting argument, you let the victim get a gun, et cetera, but the abuser that gets his weapons taken away, that's the world we live in right now. And that's the strategy to prevent death, seizing the weapons. And it's it's a strategy to prevent or to preserve life, allowing the CPLs into the hands of those that are acute or chronic victims of abuse. And I realize the nomenclature and the terms victims and survivor sometimes go hand in hand, and sometimes some people are more prone to say, I'm a survivor, I'm not a victim. I get the psychology behind all of that. So I was thinking about this morning, and I was going to ask you, would it be appropriate to say that all survivors are victims, but not all victims are survivors?
Yeah, I think so. And I usually, when I'm working with victims and survivors, I allow them to define themselves. And I'll be honest with you, there are days even now when I think about my ex getting out and the fact that I'm going to have to relocate and change my name and my social security number, that I can still say I'm a victim, because I still am a
Absolutely.
victim. Um,
Absolutely.
Definitely identifying as a survivor gives me a psychological empowerment, right? I'm a
Right.
survivor.
Right.
I left the relationship, but in many ways, I still am a victim, because I still have that looming knowledge that he is going to be getting out of prison and my life is still at risk. And we don't know. I would not be surprised, Ken, at any given moment that I'm going to get another one of those phone calls saying, he's trying to hire someone else to kill you.
Well, if I'm sheriff, it won't be a call. It will be a knock on the door. And that's what will happen. And as I've said earlier, when I make a promise, I keep a promise, because I want to hold myself accountable. Because why do we enter this? Why do we enter the sheriff's race? Because you want to do good for society. It's not about power. It's not about anything else. It's all about making the world a better place to live in. And I'm very good at it. So I know you've got some folks that want to ask questions. I know that the world of domestic violence is inundated with statistics and statistical data. We could talk about it for a long time. I know women of color are more susceptible to the violence. I know the emergency room visits are increasingly amount of domestic violence survivors and victims. I know about femicide. I know that so many kids are impacted as well. It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue, and you are putting it on the front burner, just as it should be. So let's have those questions.
Yeah, and I think one of them was answered, and that was about abusers keeping guns, and I feel like you did answer that. And currently there is legislation being decided upon right now in our Michigan Senate, whether individuals who have had personal protection orders that have expired, that haven't been renewed, should be allowed to get their weapons back. It's a hot topic right now, and there's been a lot of testimony being given. I have close advocates. Unfortunately, I have a day job, so I can't be at all of these hearings to testify personally, but I have a lot of amazing advocate friends who are there and testifying and doing everything they can to try to make sure that victims stay safe. But that was one of the questions Izzy Williams asked, is, your thoughts on abusers keeping guns.
Nicole, additionally on that topic as well, on weapons and abusers with weapons, and whether they have used the weapons to abuse their victims or whether they were caught with a weapon with a PPO, it's extremely important to enforce the laws that are on the books as well, especially when it comes to guns. Guns kill people. And we've got, if anybody thinks we're going to rid society of weapons, it's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. There's just too many weapons out there. So we have to hold those accountable that are possessing weapons illegally, and learn from that, and learn from our experiences, and learn from the constant recidivism rates and all the horrors in the world where people, perfect example, Michigan State University, kids die. The gentleman who ended up killing himself, I use the word gentleman lightly, was obviously a very sick person, mental health wise, but He had a previous gun charge, but he was allowed to buy a weapon because of the kind of gun charge he had. I look at that as hogwash. I really believe that if you've got gun charges or if you've committed crimes with guns, guns need to be seriously looked at as one of the major problems. When you've got more than half of the women that are murdered in domestic violence situations around the country killed by guns, and we're haphazardly looking at it, absolutely not. Not on my watch. Continue with the questions.
Yeah, so this is something that Satitra is asking, and we're seeing this issue happen, unfortunately, in family court a lot. But she's asking, would you fear for a child being left alone with someone who admits to having mental health issues and has a 10-year aggravated stalking and harassment history of that child's mother?
Of that child's mother. Well, in that situation, would I advocate for it, meaning allowing the parent to babysit or to be in the same area as a kid unsupervised? I think there are lots of experts out there that would probably say that's not a good idea. I would hope our local um, child protective services and the groups of courtrooms would take uh, judges and protective services and groups of people. The question though was, would I advocate for it? If it was my child and I was a woman and my spouse was convicted of 10 years of aggravated stalking, no, I wouldn't want my child there. I would fight tooth and nail to prevent that from happening. And if the judge ordered it, I would appeal it. I would appeal it and I would appeal it, because there's nothing more important than a parent's love for their child, especially then when they want to protect them. And so why and it's a great question, and it sounds like it was a real life scenario, and that's why the question was probably asked. So I look and say, if I'm going to advocate for a survivor to be able to possess a weapon in a CPL case, a situation in their home to protect themselves, I'm definitely going to advocate for not allowing a small child to go into a hornet's nest. And that's exactly what it is, because that baby is going to get stung sooner or later. And we owe it to the child and everyone. Somebody might say, well, parental rights, they have their rights. Well, I look at, they lost a lot of those rights, and a judge can make that decision. They lost a lot of those rights when they decided to engage in felony stalking and abuse. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate kind of that we're seeing a lot of victims losing custody of their children to their abusers in family court. There's actually a law that will be coming to local senators and state reps near you called Caden's Law that is designed to help prevent that, because we're seeing children being killed by the abusive parent who's given custody, and the victims being alienated from their children by a lot of family court judges because the abusers are out attorneying them because they have more money, and they continue to
Mm-hmm.
drag the victims back into court time and time again with frivolous motions and further abuse them in court. And that's a whole nother thing. We know judges, separate from law enforcement, but judges need a lot of education about the manipulative tactics of abusers
Well,
in family court.
that comes into two parts of your, if you had the magic wand and you could wave it and create change, that comes into two parts of what you had spoke about before. Number one is educating our courts as to what's really happening and why certain decisions are wrong. Number one. Number two is additional resources, such as legal resources. And
Yeah.
so that covered both of those areas. And so it's interesting that you point that out.
We have another question. As someone who works in education, we see how domestic violence impacts children. School becomes a safe place. I would love to see staff trained on how to handle these situations and how to work with kids who are impacted by domestic violence. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I would fully concur with that. And there are laws as well that are out there that hold those teachers accountable if they see evidence of child abuse. They're mandated by law, as well as coaches, teachers, professors, principals, administrators in that category, mandated by law to report those situations to the law enforcement authorities and for child protective services. They're not doing anybody any good by covering it up. As a matter of fact, they might be saving a life, not just that of the child, but that of the parent that might drop their kid off every day, and then the parent goes home and gets abused. So it brings awareness to the situation. Absolutely. I think that falls into one of the other top 5 things you talked about, and that's the educational prospect of teaching schools, educators, elected officials, those appointed to positions, and those who are in the field of the various things that impact our children, whether it be kinder carriers all the way up to college administrators.
Yeah, doing the prevention work in schools, I find often students will come to me afterwards and say, they're not being abused, but their parent is being abused. And they feel incredibly helpless and they don't feel comfortable sharing with staff, or staff will come and say, the student shared this with me. They're not being physically harmed, but I don't know what to tell them. And so if anyone, I just want to put this out there since this did come up. One thing that can give kids power when they're in a situation like this is to help them create a safety plan for themselves and their siblings when abuse starts to occur, so that they can at least identify a safe room that they can go into to lock a door, how to get to a phone if they need to call 911, and if the violence really escalates, a neighbor they can go to or someone else they can go to for help. So at least that child has some feeling of control. If violence really starts to escalate, that helps them feel a little bit more empowered, because working in the schools, it happens quite often that the kids themselves aren't being abused, so CPS isn't going to step in and do anything, but children feel helpless when the situation
And you
happens.
talk
So
about that. You talk about that in your book as well. And for those out there who have not read your book, they should, because it's kind of it's very interesting, because what it is it's a combination of nonfiction novel to true crime to education awareness. It covers the whole spectrum of, if you were to put your book somewhere in a bookstore, where would it be? In which category? True crime, self-help, legal section, education and awareness, empowerment. So my point is, and it's an easy read. Takes you not too long to read it, but it's riveting, and I'm sorry you had to live through it to produce it and to write it, but ultimately we talked on the phone, and I look at life in a certain way, and that is, we all face tragedies in life, one way or the other. And the way to cope in life, and the way to learn and to get better in life and to move on, is those tragedies and turn them into treasures. And what do I do? How do I go about doing that in my life? I had a brother that died of a drug overdose. What do? I talk about it. Public awareness, so other people might survive, and so other people might not become addicted to opioids or whatever. That's my tragedy, turning it into a treasure. And your situation, your tragic situation, as uncomfortable as it has been, and as from your own words will be, is a treasure for what you've presented to the people. And it's a learning lesson that can be taught over and over and over again. So
thank
I
you
want
for
to save
that, and
lives. I
thank
want
you
to save
for
lives, Nicole. I want to save
telling that.
lives, and that's why I'm in this position.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate your time. I did put, and I'm looking at the time. I'm like, oh my goodness, we're actually overtime. But I did put your website, MageeForSheriff.com. So if anyone wants information, and we know people are going to be watching this after the live stream. So if you're watching this after the live stream has ended, please feel free to still ask questions that Ken or myself can answer in the comments. We will absolutely be checking for comments over the next few days, and we'll make sure to address and answer any questions that you have that weren't addressed during our conversation. And Ken, is anything else you want to add before we wrap up the conversation?
Yeah, we can wrap it up any way you'd like, but I'll wrap up my words, and that is this. I want to be the next sheriff. I want to save lives. I have a lot of ideas. I will hold myself accountable. And I can guarantee you, Nicole, that if I say I'm going to create a special unit or a working group that I describe to review video, I will. If I say I want to create the foster home, that type of thing, I will. Domestic violence registry, I will work hard to see that it happens. CPL, self-defense, we talked about that. I will do it. Expediting cases and getting the caseload and the paperwork is a priority to get to the court system to save lives. I will do it. I will hold myself accountable. And that's how I am. And these things need to happen. There are so many other things that could happen that we could listen and learn and implement and do things. But my point is, I will hold myself accountable. I'm the only person that has the experience to attack problems at a global level. I certainly can hand it on a local level. And I think my ideas are very good. And I look forward to implementing them when I win this sheriff's race. And I thank you for your time tonight. And I thank your listeners for listening. And please, if you do have a chance, Nicole has put up MageeforSheriff.com. I've seen it there the entire time I've been looking at the screen. I greatly appreciate it. It will talk about several of my other platform points that deal a lot with accountability, transparency, saving lives. And I think you'll be surprised at some of my thought processes on how I want to create police reform with common sense law enforcement. Because somewhere along the line, Nicole, somewhere in the last decade, and you and I touched on this, society seems to feel that a great deal of society, or a segment of society, gives our abusers and our law violators more attention and credit than they do the victims. Call me old-fashioned.
More resources.
Exactly. And call me old-fashioned, but I will stand side by side with the victims my entire career. Do I believe people get a second chance and have commit crimes? Absolutely. Absolutely. But let's not put those people on a pedestal and remember, if there's only a certain amount of funding to go around, where do we prioritize it? And we prioritize taking care of the victims in society. My name's Ken Magee. Thank you. I want to be your next sheriff. Remember to get out there and vote next August 6th, 2024. Nicole, I'm done unless you've got anything else for me.
Thank you so much for joining me. We may have more conversations with Ken as we get closer to the actual election date. August 2024 is not sounding so far away anymore, as we're getting into November already next week. It's kind of crazy. And Satitra said, help me, I'll help you too. She may want to connect with you, Ken. So if anyone does want to connect with you through your website, is there a way for them to connect with you?
Yes, there is an email address, and there is an email address on the website, but we also spoke about this earlier. And if you're listening right now while I'm pausing here in my thought process, grab a pencil or a pen, because I give my phone number out to anyone. It's available online. It's on my website. It's on my business cards. It's on my campaign flyers. My phone number is area code 503-781-3174. I'm not sure if Nicole can type that in or not, but either way, it's 503-781-3174. And that number will be accessible when I'm sheriff as well, because I do hold myself accountable and I want to be completely accessible to the people that I'm sworn to protect. So, Nicole, you figure out how to punch that in?
Please tell me that's
Sure.
right. 503-781-3174.
Area code 503-781-3174. It's a Portland, Oregon number. I had it when I was a federal agent, and it was assigned to me when I was on a joint terrorism task force. And I just kept that number for the last 20 years. So that's why I'm stuck with an area code 503. It's kind of like my personal email address is an AOL account. You know, sometimes you're stuck with those things. So thank you,
Well,
Nicole, for putting that out there. I'm sorry?
At least it's not a Hotmail.
Yeah, it's AOL. It's AOL. So, but then the sheriff's account, the sheriff's website also, MageeForSheriff.com, also has a contact email address. Get a hold of me, folks. I want to hear your ideas. And when I'm sheriff, I'll listen to your ideas as well, because a leader can always learn.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ken. And again, anyone who still has questions or comments, please feel free to continue to put them in the comments section, and we will address them in the next few days. Thanks so much. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.